All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Just before I start, you have the translation devices here. Channel 1 is for English, I believe, and Channel 2 is for French. And so let us know if you need any help with that. My name's Jennifer Cook, and I'm Director of the Africa Program here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to CSIS, and in particular to welcome Mr. Etienne Tshisekedi, our guest of honor, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. Today's session is one of a series that the CSIS Africa program has held in the last 8 months to highlight the challenges that face the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in particular to draw attention to the critical national elections currently slated for November 2011. In this series, we've highlighted the perspectives of independent analysts, activists, U.S. policymakers. We've heard from opposition leaders and most recently from the chair of the Electoral Commission, Pastor Malunda. Most of these events, by the way, are available via webcast on the CSIS Africa Program website. I hear some feedback there. Actually, we've gotten calls from all over the world, from Australia, from Europe, from Africa. One. Ça marche? Or does it work? Okay, okay. English is one. Okay. Oh, okay. Yes, yes. Okay. Okay, can we test? Great. Most of us here, I think, are familiar with the many challenges that confront the Congo. Although many Congolese hoped that the elections of 2006 would mark a turning point in the country's trajectory, those hopes have been largely dashed as the country has seen little improvement in the last 5 years in terms of transparency and accountability, in service delivery, in infrastructure, in security in the East, and in the rule of law and protection of human rights. The challenges that Congo faces are daunting and complex, but their solution lies first and foremost in national leadership that has a strategic vision that is accountable to the Congolese citizenry and that could effectively begin to chip away at the culture of corruption and malgovernance that have plagued the Congolese political environment for over half a century. The outlook for the upcoming elections, I think, is troubling. The logistics alone are daunting, but a number of political moves, including a constitutional change earlier this year to eliminate a runoff, which puts a heavy onus on the opposition parties to ally, proposals of electoral changes that may eliminate top contenders, incidents increasing, unfortunately, of violence, assassination, and intimidation, and the possibility of ballot fraud and manipulation of the registration process are all of great concern. I think some observers we had last time as a panelist, member of the International Crisis Group, have called for a postponement of the election, saying there's no possible way that you can do this legitimately in the current context. Today, we're really delighted to welcome Mr. Etienne Tshisekedi, who is presidential candidate for the Union of Democracy and Social Progress, UDPS. I don't think I need to go into great history, but I think all of you know that Mr. Tshisekedi has been truly a significant figure in Congo's history. He's been described to me as something of a national treasure in Congo for his many decades, really over 50 years of public service, for his integrity, and for his tireless and really fearless defense of democratic principles. He has at times tried to work within the system of government, but has not been shy in speaking out against abuses of power, and has been subject to exile, to imprisonment, to harassment throughout much of his career. Mr. Tshisekedi and the UDPS boycotted the 2006 election, arguing that the process was too thoroughly corrupted at that time, but he is once again mounting a challenge and throwing his hat into the political ring. So, Mr. Tshisekedi, we're looking very much forward to your perspective on the current electoral environment, on the UPDS strategy, and perhaps what you're looking to from the United States in terms of supporting and ensuring a process that is reasonably free and fair. We're also delighted to have here today Mvemba Dizolele to offer remarks and help set the broader context for these upcoming elections. Mvemba is a distinguished fellow at the Stanford University's Hoover Institution and an African Studies visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies here in Washington. He's been a very good friend of the CSI Africa program, and we're very grateful for his insight and dispassionate analysis of developments in DRC. Mr. Tshisekedi, I'm going to turn it over to you. We'll then have Mvemba give a few remarks, and we really want to open up for questions and interactive discussion. So thanks again. Mr. Tshisekedi, you're welcome to speak from here or from where you're sitting. Okay. All right.
I can talk from here if that's possible.
Madam, I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to take the floor before this audience and for what you have just said. You've said everything, so I really don't know if there's much left for me to say. I shall be talking to you of politics in the Congo. It was an interview to the upcoming November elections, and I will sketch in the state of things with regard to human rights. This is something very close to my heart. And after that, a third point, I'll express the point of view or the vision of my party with regard to the future of the country. If we should win these elections and then come to power in the Congo. The political environment in the Congo is quite vicious. First of all, as Madame has just said, the fact that Mr. Kabila hastily changed the Constitution and modified the electoral process, cutting it from a two-stage process to a one-stage process. So probably the results the next day will not be very good. In fact, we have indications that Mr. Kabila's government has decided to stay in power, whatever the electoral results. There are certain indications. There is, first of all, the constitutional revision, which Mr. Kabila has supposedly a majority in the parliament, but he spent almost $5 million for this purpose in order to effectuate this revision of the Constitution. The indication shows an absence of any sort of survey, so we don't know whether how he should cut up the country into various electoral districts, and or whether it should be done by number of people. So they don't know how many seats to give to a given electoral district. Oh, this is Mr. Kabila who wants to do this without anyone noticing the fraud in it. And as we speak, he has already registered 5 million people in his province, whereas there is not the count is not accurate. Whereas already there in Kinshasa there are 3 or 4 million. So another indication is that the lists, that is to say, that according to the law, as soon as registration is finished, in each registration office, they have to post a list of all the voters in each office. Well, as we speak, there are 2 provinces, and Lower Congo, where registration has been finished for more than 2 months now, but they haven't published the lists of the people who will be voting. Another indication is that in the provinces normally, which are generally against Mr. Kabila and his government, as the registration offices, with a number of offices of this type, has been lowered since the election of 2006. They've been, in fact, decreased by 30%, so that they have created they've set up offices which are so far that the voters find it very hard to go such a distance to go register or to go vote. All that in order to discourage voters in those provinces. All these indications show exactly the determination on the part of Mr. Kabila and his government to not have the types of elections that anyone would wish for, elections which would be transparent and free and democratic. That's why we've come to the West to make the international community aware of what's happening, so they can bring pressure to bear on Mr. Kabila and make him drop his claims and to make him forced him to have peaceful and especially peaceful and transparent elections in a country which has known fratricidal wars. That is the environment, or the current political environment in the Congo. Just before elections which will be historic, because all Congolese see how Mr. Kabila has been exerting power for so long, exercising powers for so long, and how he has destroyed all of the great potentiality in the country. He has forced the people to live in veritable misery without solution, and at the present time, many people who live in the countryside have been exiled into cities where they hope or believe that they can make a better living. But when they find themselves there, they are obliged to live off of what they can steal, and then they're very often put in prison for that. So people wonder where they should go. And afterward, this environment, I'll go to the second point, which is the consequences of an autocratic party policy. I'm talking about human rights, and in this area, everyone knows it's just common coin. There is a problem of raping women. Many women are raped every day in the eastern provinces of the Republic. Activists or militants for the activists in favor of human rights are killed. We can cite the most well-known case of Mr. Shibeya. And Mr. Amatroko. And not to mention Pastor, who's in prison for simply having done something which didn't, for having said a sermon which didn't please the government, and so he's in jail for 10 years. I don't need to cite the case of the people in the lower Congo who have a political party, like so many others, but it was a punitive expedition sent by the police, which killed hundreds of these people who followed Congo. This was not mentioned very much in the press, but all that along with the violations of human rights, which have amounted to nearly a form of government in the Congo. And I won't even talk about the opponents who are living in exile or in prison, or the intolerance for public media, for they are forbidden, in fact, or the opposing parties have no access to them, and the determination of the government and public meetings are banned. When you talk about an opposition, it's just simply theoretical affirmations. There really is no opposition in the Congo. For example, the elections, local elections, which have been called for by the Constitution, were supposed to be scheduled before the legislative and presidential elections. But they were actually postponed indefinitely. And people who had been elected, such as mayors, well, so since mayors could not be elected, actually, they were designated. You will understand that as a consequence, all these people became automatically members of the party in power, and they are the ones who intimidate the opposition and the people themselves, so that in elections they play an important role in this process to forcing people to vote the way they want. All this, once again, is due to the party which is in power now. I have explained how my party counts or hopes to put an end to all of this. That then there was a third point, that is future prospects. And what my party counts on doing once elected or once in power. The first thing which our party would do and the reason for why it has been fighting since its creation in 1982, will be to restore the rule of law in the Congo, because that can be felt in Europe. But in Congo, it's a veritable jungle, or it is the law of the strongest. And actually, the law is not adhered to. There's no justice. And that is what my party absolutely wants to restore before anything else. Once this is done, our party will set up a national army, because everyone knows about the insecurity which is all over in this country, especially in the eastern part of the republic, because there are armed men who have never been really, there's never been a really trained professional army in the Congo ever since Mobutu in independence. They've just had militias, private militias, which at all ranks up to generals, but people were never professionally trained. What we need, of course, is to train a national army, but of course that these people would have to be well paid, because otherwise the army just lives on the back of the population, and they can make exactions, and they can also rape women. The exploitation, especially of mines. Mining has been practically military. So it was the high officers in the army who could exploit these mines, and the mining concessions were given to them. Our party would eliminate this. There's a sort of police force there. But once again, these are militias, members who are families of leading families who, with regard to their compatriots, behave almost like animals. And these people, too, must be trained and better paid so they can play the role of ensuring security or safety for everyone. This is with regard to the political level. But when we come to economics, since we have, if we have a rule of law with people who respect the law, then we can improve the business climate. At present, there are very well-known companies who do not dare to come into the Congo. They don't want to invest and work in the Congo because of the lack of justice. And the priorities given to impunity of other people. The impunity enjoyed by people who are in power now, we would end these nationalizations of companies. The party would give priority to private enterprises so that the state would not be subsidizing companies for consuming, but consumer purposes, but rather for productive purposes. I could go back to the improving of the business climate. Once these private companies would be activated and encouraged to come and invest in the Congo, thus we can create jobs, especially for young people. There is such high unemployment. Almost 90% of the labor force in the Congo is actually out of work. I have been told that my presentation was not supposed to go beyond 20 minutes, so I must not continue talking to you about all of this, because I know that when I've finished, you will ask me questions. Perhaps now you will have more detailed information about the situation in the Congo. What I would like to say is that I am taking advantage of this presentation to set out a sort of cry of alarm for those who still can make decisions among the members of the international community. We ask them to do what they can, and bring pressure to bear on the government in office so that the November elections will be democratic and free and transparent. I thank you. And now I await your questions.
We begin Thank you very much, Mr. Tshisekedi. I think that was a great base, and we'll have, I'm sure, many questions and good discussion. But first, why don't we turn to Mvemba for some brief remarks, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. Mvemba.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here once again. And to Dr. Tshisekedi, I'd like to say welcome to Washington, D.C., Betwab. We are very happy to have you here. You, as an individual in yourself, represent a segment of our national history, the history of the DRC. You were at the beginning, in 1960, with the College of the Commissaire, when the crisis erupted between President Kasavubu and his Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba. You were there in the thick of the crisis that eventually led to the arrest and the demise of Lumumba. You also were there in 1965 when the other crisis between the Prime Minister, Moïse Tshombe, and his president, Joseph Kasavubu, led to the coup d'etat of 1965 when Mobutu came to power. You know, they often say that Congo only had half a dozen university graduates at independence. You went on to become the first doctorate from the Louvanium University, so a big achievement. You also were there when the NPR was created. You were there when the Nsele Manifesto was drafted. You were there when the NPR became a state party, or party state. You went on to serve with great performance in the various institutions of the NPR, holding the portfolio as a Minister of Justice and member of the Parliament, and so on and so forth. You also had the courage, and I think this is what is missing these days in the DRC, to break with your friend Mobutu. It took you about 20 years. But nevertheless, you did break with the man, and kind of ushered the DRC, Zaire at the time, along with your 12 other friends, ushered Zaire into this new democratic transition, which has lasted about 30 years now. We're still talking about it today. So when it comes to sacrificing and dedicating one's life to the struggle, you have remained, as we say in French, sans pareil. And that's an inspiration to thousands and millions of Congolese who have watched you. Now, if we go forward, though, as we look at all the fight that you've put, you've suffered jail, you've suffered relegation to your native village, you've lost a lot, but through all these things, you've remained a man of integrity. Again, this is a very important part in the Congolese system, because integrity is often short. That's part of the problem in the DRC. The DRC is not ailing from sexual violence, as is often the center of discussion in places like Washington, D.C. It's not conflict minerals. We just got the Dodd-Frank Act passed by President Obama. Those are symptoms. The real problem in the DRC is substandard national leadership. I mentioned that, Dr. Tshisekedi, you were a compagnon de lutte of Joseph Mobutu. You were able to break off from him. But if we look today, we talk about constitutional revision. We talk about all the manigance, to use the French in this case, that's happening in the DRC, the CENI. But these things are happening not only the new crop of politicians, meaning the Kabila camp, but also because the old crop, your friends, have not renewed themselves. If you look at the people in the Senate, in the Parliament, especially in the Senate, they're all former colleagues of yours. So the onus is not much on Joseph Kabila, who was not there in 1992 when you were fighting Mobutu during the Conference Nationale. The onus is not on the Muzitos of the world, who's the Prime Minister now, who were not part of this tableau of the struggle for Congolese people. So as we move forward, we look at your performance during the, today everybody talks about the Arab Spring. I contend that before the Arab Spring, there was a Congolese Spring. There was the Beninois Spring. There were springs all over Africa. This is where you had the command to give instruction. There were villes mortes around the country. UDPS was on the rise. If you say, we will not work tomorrow, we'll sit in, people will not work, they will sit in. But then we saw that even during that time, Mobutu was living on his yacht, was able to rebound and become president, even with a system that was even much more destructive than the one we'd known before. So from 92 to 97, we had another 5 years. The pillage happened during that time. The army totally disintegrated during that time. And instead of having the resolutions that were decided on in the National Conference, we ended up with an invasion from the east. And instead of having the resolution put in place, as the Conférence Nationale recommended, we ended up with Laurent Désiré Kabila, who, by the way, suspended even the constitution altogether and ruled by decree. Through your struggle, you were able to speak up, even during that time. You spoke up. You welcomed Kabila. You said, we'll work with him and find a solution. But the solution didn't come because then he died. Joseph Kabila became president. You didn't give up. You continued and pushed for the dialogue, the inter-Congolese dialogue, which we had at Sun City and elsewhere. But then something interesting happened. You did not participate in the transitional government. You have certainly your reasons. We'd love to hear them today. But we saw the 1+4 take place, where in fact we had one of, again, most destructive system of government I've ever heard about in the country. 1 president, 4 vice presidents, who decided to proceed in what we call partage vertical. And that is, they split the country in 4, according to the 4 vice presidencies.
Just a quick break.
Okay, so I wait? I continue? Well, I need to hear it.
Pardon?
You need to
Okay,
hear it.
we'll take a quick break.
Okay, so. So far, so good? Yes. Okay. No, that's fine. I will actually use it myself. I'll claim it. It's okay. No, I understand. No, that was good. Yeah, that I can say. Oh, yeah? Ah, c'est vous. Okay, great. Nice. We'll talk a little bit at the end. Because of the break? Okay. What time is it now?
Started late because, hey, how come you weren't allowed in there? And I was,
Where?
Mvemba, if you'd like to restart.
So I was saying that the bulk of the problem we're facing today is not from the emergence of the Kabila clan, but it's also courtesy of your own colleagues. We've not had any renewal of leadership. I was a kid when you started your movement. Now I'm almost a responsible human being, and nothing has changed in the DRC. So we're still dealing with the same cast of people who brought us everything else that you know better than I do. So as we go to this new process, I was saying that after the transition, after you call for the dialogue inter-Congolais, you yourself did not take part in the 1+4, which is a terrible type of government. I'm sure you have your own reasons, and you can tell us today if it comes up in Q&A. But we know that 1+4 led to partage vertical. And partage vertical simply meant we split the country and all the institutions in the country and all the portfolios in 4, including the embassies, meaning various factions claim various sections of the diplomacy of the country. The ambassador in Germany may be representing Bemba when the ambassador in the US represents Kabila. So you can just imagine how a country can have, you can ask the question, how a country can have a coherent diplomacy when the various ambassadors already are presenting different perspectives. What does your Minister of Foreign Affairs say when he goes to the UN? Does he represent Kabila's view as the president? Or does he listen to what Bemba says? Because Bemba says, I have my own guns. If you change that, this is what I will do. Anyway, to your credit again, you insisted that the transition has to end quickly. If come June 30th, 2005 or 2006, they didn't vacate the place, you will call the troops to the street. And eventually the international community took heed, and we had the elections. But people ask, was those elections timely? You know, especially when we consider that with your level, as time passed, your stature continued to rise. There is no doubt in my mind that you're a national treasure, that you stand alongside Simon Kimbangu, Joseph Kasavubu, Lumumba, and so on and so forth, true nationalists who fought for the country. But at the same time, as you called off your troops in 2006 for enrollment because you did not agree with what the system was, with an entire section of electorate that were denied their vote, in part because you called them off, and then by the time they came back, the party in charge now used that as an excuse to keep them out. So because of that, I think we have some repercussions that we're still facing today. You didn't have representations. I don't know what you'll have become, whether you'll become president or not, that we cannot tell. But the fact that you withdrew, you gave space to Bemba, because all the disenchanted votes went to somebody else, that people had to choose somebody. We know that politics does not allow for void, and that void needs to be filled. So Bemba had a new capital. He also had the advantage of having money, having a militia, having a radio empire and TV. So he was a state unto himself. He could actually go to the elections. Nobody else could go to the election that way because the media are controlled by the state. The security system is controlled by the state. So as we continue and we see the constitutional revision take place, again, your old colleagues, very much, who are in the Senate, vote for this. On the appearance, this is legal. It's bad. It's legal in the sense it passed through the Congress. This makes me think of what the U.S. ambassador in Kinshasa said when he was interviewed on Radio Okapi, which I think was irresponsible as a statement from a U.S. official. When they asked him about the revision of the Constitution, he said, this is an internal affair. We don't meddle in it, but we'll support a transparent process. I'm not sure how that's going to work. But so now we have at the point where UDPS is a party that's very important. We know the credibility, we know the struggle and the investment that you've put in the fight for democracy and the rule of law, which you firmly believe in. But UDPS also has become a has-been party in many ways. You remain very relevant. It's not clear how relevant the party is, because we're seeing emergence. There's an entire generation of Congolese, millions of them, who were born in '82, who have no idea about your struggle. Zero. They don't know who you are except what we tell them, because we know how great you are in that sense. But they don't know who you are. So as things start shaping up, you represent a national movement, but we have problem with structures of the party. This leads me to the closing section. Where does the money come from? Mvemba had money. His own, and some we took, I don't know where, but he had money. UDPS, as long as it's been, maybe because the system, you didn't join in 2006. You didn't have members of parliament of your own to block the constitutional revision. Maybe they could have had some money. I don't know if their businessmen will fund the campaign. We don't have that tradition in DRC. Where is access to the media? So these are some of the questions that we are out there. But even if the system was transparent, and transparent means we can campaign everywhere people want, but what does it mean in terms of structure? What does it mean in terms of the continuation of the process? Now that the Constitution has been reviewed, are you going to ally yourself with the other emerging political actors? Kamere was here a few months ago, and he called for rallying of forces with you and other actors in the DRC. This leads me now to kind of go to what the US can do in this case. Your struggle is very well embraced by all Congolese. It's not just your struggle, it's our struggle, it's the struggle of the Congolese people. But what does it mean? I mean, what is the vision that you have for the people? You outline a little bit of that. You are not old, but you're no longer the young lion that you used to be, that could roar to the various cities of Congo. What does that mean in terms of passing the baton? If this doesn't work out exactly as you had envisioned, as we've seen before it not work out as you had envisioned, what does it mean for us going down the road? I talk about the Congolese Spring of 2000, in the 90s. We need Congolese Spring now. I'm not sure the US is confused when it comes to Congo. Too many voices, the NGO community, the humanitarian, I mentioned sexual violence. The vision of the DRC in the US, in Washington, is hijacked by NGOs and humanitarians. People who claim to be friends of Congo, but who have agenda that have nothing to do with the future of the DRC. So it becomes incumbent on the Congolese. After all, you are the generation that kicked the Belgians. If we only had half a dozen college graduates, we still managed to kick the Belgians out of Congo. What does that say about the people? It says that the people are capable of this. So I personally, speaking to you, Dr. Tshisekedi, but also to the thousands of Congolese, wherever they may be, is the responsibility in us, not to preach you because you've been there, but just to remind you that the fire has to come from Kinshasa, and then America will follow. When the Egyptians got to the street, we saw what happened. The US didn't know what to do. It's a very classic case. We know, you know this because you worked with Mobutu, who was kind of the Mubarak of Congo. So we saw what happened there. So I will stop there, and we'll take everything as to Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mvemba. There are a number of questions within those remarks, I think, and I think we'll turn to Dr. Tshisekedi to answer those. I mean, one of the questions is the immediate strategy of the UPDS in terms of alliances and internal alliances with other opposition parties that the constitutional change makes so important if there's a real challenge to be mounted against Kabila. What I do, though, want to turn to the audience because I know people will have lots of questions. If you're okay, I'd like to take 2 or 3 questions at a time, which I'll write down, and then you answer them together. Is that?
No, je préfère répondre à une question.
Okay.
No, I prefer to take one question.
Open up to the floor then, and I'll ask that you keep your question brief and that you identify yourself. Okay.
Mais j'aimerais d'abord répondre.
Okay, okay.
I would first like to answer. I think that what Mr. Mvemba said is completely true. But there is a situation in the Congo that perhaps no one was able to follow because it's not spoken of a great deal in the newspapers. And that is that the Congolese people, like all other people, aspires to freedom. Despite the fact that my party struggled for a long time, and it's true that the youth may not recognize it, but everyone knows that the UDPS fought for freedom, for democracy. Yet, in a few words, we've just told you how the Congolese people is hungering at this time, not just physically, but even intellectually and morally. So you can see that even if people don't know UDPS's history, anyone aspiring to freedom must be able to wonder why there is such hunger, why things are not going well. We need to look at Mobutu, Kabila, and Kabila's son. We look at the results of that. We don't see any promise that would bring change to the Congolese who are suffering, who want freedom. That's when it's time for UDPS to come back, because the constancy with which UDPS has fought makes it such that people say that UDPS always fights for democracy, freedom, and the state and rule of law. That's perhaps where we'll find change. And that's why today, because despite what one might think, the Congolese people want change. That is a change of leadership. And the elders who know the history of UDPS remember that in 1990, when the Sovereign National Conference elected Tshisekedi as prime minister, everyone remembers that that very day, the price of food goods had gone down automatically without an order being given from anywhere. It is known that anyone who, at that point, who had taken government vehicles, everyone went spontaneously to return them to the government buildings were full of vehicles brought back by those who had taken them. So the Congolese imagination has retained that Mr. Tshisekedi and whose positions have always remained constant. He preaches integrity against corruption, against what we call anti-values. Once he arrived in power, that was the effect. So people are really searching for leadership where they can live better than they are living now. And those are the circumstances that we are presenting ourselves to these elections, or running in these elections. During this famous, or this well-known 1+4 division, despite what one might think that UDPS should have participated in the elections, now the people sees it as that the UDPS, being what it was, did not want to get involved in this criminal game. Because indeed, the 2006 elections produced the results that we currently deplore. That's why people are starting to say UDPS was right not to participate in these elections, because it's as if they would have legitimized Kabila's government. And I would say, as an aside, that at that time, things were led by what we call the international community, such that it was clear to everyone that the choice had already been made of Kabila by the international community. It was very clear. And so that's in fact why participating in those elections would have legitimized. I could say that I participated in it, but I don't reproach myself for not having participated in Mr. Kabila's election. On the contrary, I feel very, very much at peace with that. And I agree with those who say that it was really very good not to have participated in this masquerade of an election, because now we can see the final results of that. And before I came here, I stayed in Europe for 2 weeks, in France and Belgium in particular. I had the opportunity to have some conversations with people who at that time had participated in that election. And I must say that everyone talked about their disappointment and wondered how they thought that Kabila was going to run a great Congo, because everyone realized that now the problem is a problem of leadership. It's not really a problem of position. It's really about leadership. There needs to be somebody who can be trusted by the Congolese people, so that once he has a vision, that everyone follow that vision. Because it must be said that whatever the capacity is of the next administration, it will need time to be able to satisfy the population. Yet, these days, since there has been no immediate change, if the leader does not have the people's trust and confidence, it is clear that things can go badly. They can say, well, we thought he was going to do this and that, but he was like everyone else. So I think that's the situation that we have in the Congo, and that is why I say that independently of the strategies as to how to face this, it must be known that the psychological undertone is what I have just described. And now I'm ready to continue to answer your questions. As regards strategy, I would say that since Mr. Kabila proceeded to the constitutional revision as we know it, we are already together as opponents, as a real opposition, to decide on a common candidate to the extent that we can. But we all have the problem. I was saying that there was no opposition, there was no one organized because of Kabila. But we have this problem of organization of our own party, beginning with my own. So we are so concerned by this issue of the organization of the parties we haven't really given enough attention to putting together our common platform. But we will arrive at that. We will get there. We will find a common candidate who will be one who stands against the current candidate.
We will take maybe 4 questions, but we'll take them one at a time. Yes, the gentleman here. A microphone is coming. Please introduce yourself and keep the question short.
Pasteur Honoré Moulumba.
Pastor Honoré Moulumba. I'm here of the Church of the Trumpet. I am an expert, international expert on the environment. The first concern is that when Mr. Tshisekedi speaks, we hear a lot more about the UDPS and a little bit less about the opposition. We get the impression that it's only the UDPS that worked to help the Congolese people to expel the government in place. We would have liked to hear him speak about the opposition in general, but the question is not there. The question has to do with what we learned a week ago, where President Congo is preparing with the current administration, the current government, to boycott the elections and prepare another transition where they would go among those who are leading. And these things are there's greater and greater confirmation. Are you aware of this, and what is your position? Thank you. First, your first remark. You just answered it almost indirectly yourself. I can only speak of that of which I am sure. And so my party, I mean my party, so the others, as you've just said or noted, people can say that they are part of the opposition. In a few days or in a few weeks, you will learn that they dealt with the current government or were appointed to a position in the government. So I cannot speak. I am not here to speak about those who might be taking advantage of such opportunities. If the opposition does this, the Congolese needs to be aware of it, but we don't need to speak about it for it to be able to exist. As regards the second part of your question, yes, I am aware of one thing, but that of which I am aware is the following. Almost everyone, I see that what Madam said a few moments ago in her introduction, including international organizations, before the preparation for these elections, the nomination of the well-known Seni, the registration processes, all of this is very slow, and no one is sure, as a result, that these will take place on time within the constitutional time frame. So there will be the problem of the government after the 6th, because Kabila's government actually comes to an end, his term comes to an end on the 6th of September. So the issue will arise, how will Congo be led during that time? And what I have learned as regards Congo, that as it is written in the Constitution, when the president is not able to perform his duties, he will be represented by the chairman of the Senate. So, I'm sorry, on the 6th of December, if the elections are not yet finished, as the leader of the Senate, he will take power. But in my opinion, things are not that simple. First of all, because he himself, when the term comes to an end, it's the legislature that comes to an end as well. So Congo will no longer be in office.
n'aura plus de mandat d'être.
He will no longer have the mandate of being the chairman of the Senate or the leader of the Senate. So there is still a problem. This needs to be reflected upon. His maneuvering and his campaign are not going to find a solution to this problem.
McCormick, formerly with CSIS. Dr. Tshisekedi, it's nice to see you again. When we first met 21 years ago, many of the things that you argued and said must happen in Congo are the same thing, or Zaire at that time, are the same things you're saying must happen today. Questions very short. C'est bon?
So we start, huh?
Continuing? Oui? Yes. Given the recent constitutional changes that allow for one vote, one ballot in Congo, and noting the multiplicity of candidates who will be running in the election, most people believe that no single person will get a majority of the vote. My question to you is very simple. If you are not the person with the most votes, and the person who is does not have a majority, will you recognize that person as the president of your country?
Je vous dis les choses telles que j'ai.
I will tell you things as I experience them. When I said earlier that the Congolese people are very aware of the stakes, of what they're looking for, they don't need to be just told any old thing right now. We spoke of the Arab Spring. There's also a certain spring in the Congo that is a true maturity that didn't exist before. The Congolese people had been manipulated to date, but I think that cannot go on. The Congolese citizen now knows what he wants. And I don't claim to be indispensable, but I would say that if the Congolese people, whatever the reasons may be, don't have the president they want, I would not guarantee that in the Congo there wouldn't be a Tunisian phenomenon.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Je m'appelle Patrick Pangelo. Je suis membre du parti l'UNC.
I'm a member of the party. I would like to first salute your courage and your political career, which is unique. I have a very simple question as regards the political class, those who are the generation that is arriving behind you. I would like to ask a question with a view to the elections that are coming. What do you think of the state of the generation that is going to take over from you and your personal role, or the role of your generation as regards the training of this new generation such that they can be competent and able to follow in your footsteps and with your struggles? The only new generation that I can think of is that of my party, because I know that party best, where it came from, where it's going, and what are the and since this party is democratic, I must first say that this cannot be dictated from the outside. It has to be a natural phenomenon. It must not be someone else who decides that this new generation must take over. No, this has to come from the nature of Congolese society. So I would come back to what I was saying. Since my party is a democratic party, as soon as I am no longer able to direct that party, I think that the first duty of that party would be to call a Congress that will decide democratically who will take over. That's how I see things. Perhaps those who assured Kabila's rise to power, perhaps they dictated who would take over, who the next generation would be to come in. And now you can see what we're talking about. And I just told you that what the policymakers of 2006 think of their products. So I would say that this takeover process that you're talking about is a natural process. It depends really on the nature of Congolese society.
We'll take one here. Yeah. Sorry. No, I meant you. I'm sorry.
Merci, Papa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tshisekedi. My name is Mr. Kuf. I've sent balloons there, and your father, you're the good father, the best father for the Congo. My question is what? You can see how the Western countries, the great powers, are acting. Are you sure of your place? Do you not see any manipulation because you can already see the place of, and so this is my question. I think that the time I've spent during my struggles it was not just to get money. I didn't do that. And I will never do that. But I cannot give you any guarantees. My history should serve as a guarantee. My own personal history, that should guarantee that I will never do that. And also, when we analyze what we call the Arab Spring, I think that societies which up to now were manipulated have learned a lot of lessons from their manipulators, and I think that today it will no longer be as in the past. Things are changing, and to manipulate the people, that whole scenario has changed. So what I will say now is that we are going to resist more easily any sort of manipulations of the type which were done in the past. This is the only assurance which I can give you.
Yes, the gentleman in the middle there. Microphone's coming.
Thank you. I'm Chimanga John Metzel with the Congo Educational Council. I'd like to agree actually with Mvemba on Ambassador Entwistle's misstep at a certain point, but also to recognize that in meeting with Dr. Tshisekedi, he did consider him a tutor, and Ambassador Entwistle considered himself a student. So my question goes to advice to us as advocates for Congo in Washington at this time. In the lead up to the 2006 election, Ambassador Mies, who currently heads MONUSCO, supported the decision of the Electoral Commission to exclude members of your party, Dr. Tshisekedi, from registering to vote, and this was almost a year before the election. Recently, Ambassador Mies has been heard to say that MONUSCO may not be the right organization to help organize the upcoming election. This despite the legislation of Senator Obama when he was in the Senate, which was passed and signed by President Bush, that if the UN organizations do not help organize elections, they should be penalized monetarily by the United States. So my question to you is whether MONUSCO is acting in good faith, and should we as advocates call for the resignation of Ambassador Mies for his consistent missteps? Thank you.
C'est-à-dire que
Perhaps I understood a part of what you were saying, but I cannot understand all of it. That is to say, I can talk about MONUSCO, but when you mix that up with Mr. Mies, that is a different individual. What I can tell you is that given everything that's been said here, in the Congo, nous pensons que le MONUSCO is still necessary, and we'll go even farther with the international community. We are asking also the Security Council to enforce the role of MONUSCO, not only for security, but also for a real taking in hand of the process, this process for the elections, because I'm not sure of everything they can do. I just said what I was thinking. That is what we call the army in the Congo is really the police. So this is not the time when we can do without the services of MONUSCO. What the errors, just because the error is made by one member of MONUSCO doesn't mean that we should generalize this and apply it to everyone there.
Je réponds au nom de Constant.
So I'm Constant Mala. I'm a pathologist at Georgetown University Hospital here. Mr. President, I would like to thank you, first of all, because I'm like a child who is... we were part of the UDPS, and we went to the residence of the party. We saw how several times we've been betrayed. We've been betrayed several times. I could illustrate it. Mobutu said of a sovereign state, you should be brief. But the people came back because of what you did as a Soviet. I think you'd rather do. So you changed mentalities, and that attracted us to you. You were talking about people who had been thieves, and then Mobutu was... he wanted you to suggest someone else. And so you have not talked yet about that. He said, give us another name of someone who could serve. Mongolia was seated, and there was someone next to him, and said, he was next to him, and he made us suffer a lot in the UDPS. But then the amendment with Cuba said he already knew what he would have as a relationship. So after the night Mobutu passed so Mobutu then became prime minister. So this was a betrayal. I say this to demonstrate how many times there have been these betrayals. I have lived through these things. We have continued to follow. You fell ill, and we prayed. I was one among those who were praying. Thank God you returned to health, and you came back so we can finally assume power. However, little children have grown up and become doctors like me, but we do not want things to be limited to that, because the objective of a political party is to assume power. In 2006, we were not taking part in the elections. There were several reasons. I agree entirely with your reasons, but now we are part of the electoral plan. But nothing here is clear. The president of the Senate was here. It's seated where he was seated there near where you are. The president didn't give any. There was even someone who asked in all of what you're saying. It was what I want to say here, Mr. President. My question. We are determined to go to these elections when they take place. What is the guarantee where we are now? What are the guarantees that we will really have a chance at good elections? Thank you. I didn't understand some of the names you were saying, but I don't. Ulunda. Yes, but first of all, it's Murundala. He has a policy, and that's diplomacy. He gave a good speech. It was very reassuring. But in reality, we discovered a sort of double personality in him. You know, first of all, biologically, he is very, very close to power and a co-founder of the PPD. It's not for nothing that he was put there. I remember that a friend of mine, a Western ambassador, told me that they learned that Runda was made an ambassador. They said no, it's not to put across the message that they were against it, because we wanted an independent election. As a co-founder, he was not only related to you, and Kabila said, in fact, yes, he is there. So this is to say that he gave you a few facts to demonstrate that in the future there will be fraud. But the fact that it was put there in that place was not for nothing. So once again, regarding guarantees, I don't know if I can give you any. The only thing I can tell you is my conviction and my determination, my commitment, and that of my party to not only participate in the election, but also to win. Thank you very much, and welcome, Dr. to Washington. My question regards the eastern part of the Republic, where it's neither peace nor war. As you said, the army today is really police, and is really made up of former militias. We know there are also foreign militiamen in the army. My question is this: how are you going to dissuade these people how will you persuade them to throw down their arms once you are president? How can you, if you want Okay, if you want to have a peaceful accession to power, what are you going to do about the army? I suppose that is that if someday I am in power, first of all, in the East, if you see a lot of people who are making a lot of noise and disorder, they are the Mai. They are sort of local warlords or people who were Kabila's companions in arms. When the cake was split up, Kabila forgot them. They were just given low grades in the army. They were corporals and sergeants, and then they had to live in the bush. They were sent out to the bush to live because their colleagues, some of their colleagues had become, heads of staff and generals. But my election would have to come from the people. So civil society is, we would be voted in by the people. As a result, this is part of the problem we have to solve, because what I talked about would not exist if there is an elected president. There would not be these local warlords with so much. No, things would calm down a lot. And then I mentioned the training of a new national army and national police. I think that once we have satisfied the second condition, that I think that what's going on in the East will not continue to happen. Okay.
Here, we'll go here.
Merci beaucoup, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And thank you, Dr. I am Mr. I'm from Boston. I have a question just to close. I really thank you very much. I was in Chicago not long ago where Paul Kama was, and he said, what is going on in the Congo? What is that? Why are you always trying to attack me with the problem of Congo? Was simple. He said just like that, the Congo does not have a leader, it does not have a responsible government, and he was embarrassed, but he said, what are the people going to, what can the Congolese do? What they will do? It's very difficult. Since I'm a Congolese, it's hard to talk about them, but we must work together and see if we can have a good leader who will put things back into order again. Thank you. I know, I'm sorry, too many people want to ask questions.
Meetings. I'm sorry. Many people were.
I was raising my hand.
I know, so were other people. Okay. I want to say a very warm thanks to Dr. Tshisekedi for coming here to CSIS, to Washington, to our audience for their interest and encouragement. I think we're all very much looking forward to a Congolese spring, a peaceful Congolese spring. I think at CSIS we want to continue to keep a focus and attention on these upcoming elections because they are so critical. We want to thank you for helping us do that today, and wish you very well in the coming months. Please join me again in thanking Dr. Tshisekedi and Mvemba, and thank you all again for coming this afternoon.